Hello and welcome to Diecast Diaries. I'm Dan, and first of all I'd just like to wish you all a very happy new year and hope you all had a lovely Christmas. So for this first video of 2025, having recently done a video on the Dinky military boat range, I thought I'd have a look at another naval range from the 1970s in the form of Matchbox Seakings. Now, Seakings were released by Matchbox in 1976 and lasted until 1980. It was a range of sort of small-scale die-cast warships. There were 8 castings in the range, 2 of which were also released in different colour schemes under different names to make a total of 10 models. And one of the other models was actually the only one to get any form of a variation. So technically there were 11 models in total to collect. I don't think it was a terribly successful range for Matchbox for reasons which I'll go into a bit later on. But just before we have a look at any of the actual models, I should point out that this here is actually the playmat that Matchbox released as part of the Seakings range. I was trying to think how best to incorporate it into the video, as it is quite sort of long. And I thought, well, why not use it for the purpose which it's intended? So yeah, this is the Seakings playmat. So most of the models were released in 1976, with a couple that followed in 1978, but all models lasted until, as I say, 1980 before they were deleted from the catalogues. So the very first one was this one, which Matchbox just called the Frigate. These were all kind of fairly generic ships, and in the case of this one, it's, from what I can tell, completely made up. I've not been able to find any ship that kind of looks like this. Also, it's pretty obvious that Matchbox weren't going for any realistic colour schemes. This one is probably one of the worst in terms of the colour schemes. I'm guessing it was just an attempt by Matchbox to make it look a bit more appealing rather than them all being grey, which is obviously would have been sort of normally. Also, what's obvious is that these, a bit like the dinky boats I kind of mentioned earlier, obviously not meant to float at all. So they've got wheels underneath for going along the carpet. But the whole hull and underneath is all die-cast, and then the deck and superstructure and gun turrets, things like that, they're all plastic. It was kind of pretty similar for all of the models in the range. But despite the fact that a lot of that is plastic, because all of this is metal, there's actually sort of a nice bit of weight to this. So as I say, this does appear to be a ship that Matchbox have designed themselves, although it does have F109 on the side, and there was an F109 which was HMS Leander, which was a frigate as well, of course, with having an F number. HMS Leander looks nothing like this at all. So I think, as I say, although it looks pretty plausible as a ship, I think I quite like, apart from the colour scheme, I quite like the design of the ship. Yeah, it does appear to be one that Matchbox have just made up. So got gun turret at the front, one at the back, and then I'm guessing with it being a frigate, these are kind of sort of anti-submarine mortars, that kind of thing, or some kind of anti-submarine weapon anyway. So that's the first one. As I say, Matchbox just called the frigate. Now, this was one of the ones that was released in a different colour scheme. I'll have to say a better looking colour scheme, and under a different name, which I'll say we'll come to that shortly. So I'll just put that one over there. The next one was the Corvette. So it's like a small sort of escort ship for convoys. A slightly better colour scheme, I have to say, apart from obviously the red gun turrets and sort of plastic bits in the middle there. Again, it's another ship that's completely made up. It's a slightly odd ship, I think, with it having the sort of 3 sort of completely separate sections of the superstructure. But yeah, this is the other one that was released in a different colour scheme under a different name. So obviously we'll come to the other one shortly. But yeah, so again, all metal hull. And then all plastic sort of deck, superstructure, and gun turrets. The gun turrets, I should point out, do turn on all the ships, but that's the sum total of any working features that any of them had, it has to be said. So yeah, so that's the Corvette. Again, as I say, a completely made up ship. The next one is the battleship. Now this one, although I think, again, it is a made-up ship, it does at least look like a real battleship. I think from the design that Matchbox have gone with the sort of 2 forward turrets and 2 aft turrets, plus the midships-mounted seaplane on a catapult, it looks rather like the sort of Bismarck or Tirpitz design battleships in terms of the layout. Not sure if that's what Matchbox was going for. Obviously, a slightly odd one for them to choose. All right, the famous ships, but it's you'd have thought they'd have gone for maybe a British or even an American sort of battleship. But and again, the number on the side 110 it's a spurious number that Matchbox have just made up. So it's quite nice, the battleship. I say I do quite I like the fact that they've included a little plane in the middle there. And these are, of course, different gun turrets to what have been featured on the earlier ones. So it wasn't just like the same sort of accessory that they just included in all of them. And they do look pretty good. I'm guessing on this they'd be either 14 or 15-inch guns. I have to say, for a battleship, it's not terribly heavily armed, because apart from that, you've got 4 smaller turrets, and that's about it. One good thing to say about this one is it is at least in a slightly better colour scheme. I'm guessing that the brown colour for the deck was meant to replicate like a sort of a wooden deck, so it doesn't look too bad. And you've got the sort of silver and grey. So at least, as I say, in terms of colour schemes, that one looks a bit better. So yeah, so that's the battleship. And then the next one is the aircraft carrier. Now, this is the first ship that does, at least in part, seem to have been based on a real ship. I was having a look through some of my books, and although it's not identical, it does seem very similar in terms of both the side profile and the deck layout. It seems very similar to HMS Victorious. Again, an unusual one for Matchbox to choose. HMS Victorious was actually an illustrious class aircraft carrier that actually was commissioned in 1941, so it did see a lot of action in the Second World War. Victorious was actually the only one of its class that was then modernised post-war to operate jets, so it would have had sort of steam catapults fitted, the angled deck installed, things like that. Now, I say it's an odd choice, although it did operate post-war, because the real Victorious was actually scrapped by 1969, so obviously predates the introduction of Seakings. And of course, there were current Royal Navy ships. Ark Rill would have been an obvious one for Matchbox to base it on, but yeah, as I say, it seems to be based on HMS Victorious. The superstructure is slightly different, but as I say, a lot of the other features do sort of seem quite similar. The number doesn't match, though. It's close, though, because HMS Victorious was number 38, so it's not far out. But the planes on the deck, clearly meant to be F4 Phantoms, a type widely used by the Royal Navy, although ironically not a type that Victorious would ever have had on board, but there you go. But yeah, and again, although it's in sort of a, not terribly realistic colour schemes with it having the sort of blue deck, I don't actually think it looks too bad. I quite like the sort of highlighted bits in yellow on the deck. Look at the other side, and got a couple of ship's boats and the crane. Yeah, I think that's actually quite a nice one. I think that was always one of my favourites, was the aircraft carrier. Now, it's actually the aircraft carrier that's the only one that had any kind of a variation. Now, this was introduced in 1978, and then this is the one that then saw out till the end of the Seakings range. I find it a little bit odd that Matchbox chose to do this. None of the others have variations, as I say. And apart from the red stickers, which make it even less realistic than it already was, it's identical. It even has the same number. So it just seems a bit of an odd choice for Matchbox to do. As I say, apart from that, it is completely identical. So yeah, bit of an odd one, but as I say, it is a variation. So if you do want the complete set, that's the other one to get. I'd say that was 1978 until 1980. So that's both of the aircraft carriers. The next one was the submarine chaser, as Matchbox called it. Now this, as you can see, is exactly the same as the frigate, just a different colour scheme. But like I said earlier when I was talking about the frigate, that the other version was in a much better looking colour scheme. Yeah, I really like this one. I think the actual design of ship looks really good. It's just the colour scheme of that one that kind of spoiled it a little bit. But yeah, this one's really nice. Again, the number doesn't match with any real ship. Well, so it does. It matches with HMS Yarmouth, but it's not one that this looks anything like. So, but yeah, other than that, this is identical to the frigate, and they actually had, we can just about see there, I think both castings, both sort of models were actually listed underneath. So you got frigate listed there, sub chaser listed there. So they obviously just, it is, the identical hull that they use there. So, but yeah, so that's the sub chaser. And then we've got the convoy escort, and then this is the other version of the corvette that we looked at earlier on. Unfortunately, again, it's a bit suffers the same as the frigate in having a red deck, so it's kind of even less realistic than the previous version. So, yeah, a bit of an odd one. And again, it's got both model names underneath there. Yeah, that's probably my least favourite of the range. I think the ship design in general is a bit of an odd one. and then the fact it's got this big red deck looks rather sort of unusual. But yeah, C17 again, it's a totally spurious number, and a C number like that would actually mean a cruiser rather than a corvette or convoy escort. So it's a completely inappropriate number, but it's okay. So yeah, so that's the convoy escort. And then we move on to a ship that is a real, or is clearly based on a real ship. Matchbox just call this one the helicopter carrier, but it's actually clearly based on the French ship Jeanne d'Arc, which was a helicopter carrier launched by the French in 1964. And it would actually, at the time that Seakings came out, have been a current ship. The real ship wasn't decommissioned and scrapped until 2014. So it actually had a fairly long service life. But yeah, a slightly odd choice for Matchbox to pick, but it's unmistakable if you look at sort of pictures of the real sort of Jeanne d'Arc. Although again, the number is completely wrong. The real ship was number 97. Yeah, it's unmistakable. The only thing that seems to be slightly different is Matchbox installed a missile launcher on the front here. The real one, from pictures I've seen, I can't say, I've not found a picture of it with any kind of weapon on the bow. But the two turrets sort of either side of the superstructure here, and the layout of the rear deck, the crane on the side, the sort of rear well, and the sort of turret at the back, all match. So it's nice to see one that is kind of based on a real ship. Okay, the colour scheme again is wrong or a figment of Matchbox's imagination. But again, it's one of the better ones, I have to say, with the blue hull and the sort of brown deck and the stickers. The helicopters look to me to be Seakings, which isn't a type that Jeanne d'Arc would have operated, as it's not a type the French use, but it looks good. I think the actual little helicopter, the fact that it's actually got 4 separate rotor blades at that scale is pretty good, I think. And I like the fact that they've got a different one with the folded rotor blades, obviously being either put away or brought up from the hangar. But yeah, I think that's actually a really nice one. And it's nice to see that they've got different gun turrets, a different sort of weapon fitting there, so they're not just reusing the same pieces over and over again. But yes, yeah, so that's the helicopter carrier. And the next one is actually completely based on a real ship. So Matchbox just called this one the guided missile destroyer. I would say this is one of my favourites of the range. I just think the detail on this one's really good. I sort of love the fact it's got a helicopter on the back and they've got the big missile launcher. It does have the same turrets as the battleship, but obviously with this being a destroyer, I guess these will be supposed to be sort of twin 5 or 6 inch mounts. Now, as I say, this one is actually a real ship. D02 was HMS Devonshire, and looking at pictures of the real HMS Devonshire, it's virtually identical in terms of the shape of the hull. You've got this sort of raised bit here, the shape of the superstructure, the distinctive radar here, even the sort of twin turrets at the front, the helipad and the missile launcher. And again, at the time, it would have been, just about a current ship. The real ship was actually decommissioned in 1978 and unfortunately ended up being sunk as a target in 1984. There was some possibility it was going to be sold to the Egyptian Navy, but that, as I say, obviously never came to fruition. So yeah, sunk as a target, but yeah, unmistakable. And thankfully with this one, although the blue deck, again, obviously isn't totally realistic, it is in a better colour scheme than a lot of them. I think the silver sort of works quite nicely. So it would have been a real shame, I think, if they'd done a real ship in essence and then done it in a totally ridiculous colour scheme. So I think that's definitely one of the nice ones, and certainly one of my favourites from the range. And again, also similar to the turrets, you've got the missile launcher does sort of turn at the back there, but yeah, nothing else in terms of any working features. So that's the guided missile destroyer. And then the last two from the range, these are the ones that were introduced in 1978. So really, we're only kind of available for a couple of years. And the first one is the submarine. Now, this unfortunately is the one that's in the worst condition out of all the ones I've got. Seakings generally, they're not terribly difficult to find. Certainly, if you want to pick up unboxed ones, you can get them pretty cheaply. Obviously, condition has an effect, but most of the ones I've picked up, they've been less than a £5 in a lot of cases. The submarine, however, is clearly the rarest of the range, and if you go on eBay, most of the others you'll be able to find in varying degrees of condition, from sort of battered examples to mint unboxed, up to obviously boxed ones. But the submarine. I don't know why, whether it was produced in sort of lesser numbers than the others, I'm not really sure. But yeah, this one, if you can find one of these in good condition and it's a good price, I suggest snapping it up. Now, the submarine is another one that does seem to be based on a real ship. Now, clearly, with it having deck guns, it's a World War II submarine. As soon as, after the end of the Second World War, submarines lost their deck guns as they were kind of spending more time under the surface. Of course, not long after you've got the introduction of nuclear submarines. So yes, it's definitely a World War II submarine. Now, having had a look again through various books and that, the profile, and I think one of the key things with this is the fact that it's actually got two identical deck guns. Submarines tended to only have sort of one large caliber gun, and then they'd have a smaller one for like 20mm or 40mm as like an anti-aircraft gun. Well, this has clearly got two guns the same, and there are two submarines which look very similar to this, have two deck guns, and the superstructures are very similar shape, and that's USS Nautilus and USS Narwhal. Now, Nautilus, that's not to be confused with the nuclear one that came into service in the 1950s. This is the World War II version. But yeah, they were quite rare in that they actually had twin 6-inch guns, which was quite a large caliber for a deck gun. And as I say, they had one forward and one aft. And looking at a side profile, even the sort of shape of the superstructure is quite similar. It's not identical, but it's certainly the closest I could find. And again, I'll say, the colour, obviously, it's not terribly realistic, but it's a lot better than it could have been, I think. And I think it's good that they used the black plastic, and that sort of suits it really well. But yeah, the submarine, as I say, you can see it's got the torpedo tube sort of moulded into the casting there. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the best one I've been able to get. That's the one I'm kind of on the lookout to replace if I can. But yeah, as I say, if you see one of those, and it's a good price, I suggest getting it. It's a hard one to find, certainly in good condition at least. So yeah, so that's the submarine. And then the last one of the range is the anti-aircraft cruiser. Now, this one clearly isn't based on a real ship. It's quite an odd-looking ship, I think. And Matchbox called it an anti-aircraft cruiser, but it's actually got three of the sort of battleship-type turrets. I'm guessing these here and here are supposed to be sort of anti-aircraft missile launchers or something. I'm not really sure. The C number does at least mean that it is a cruiser. But yeah, it's quite an odd design. As I say, I've not found any ship that looks remotely like this. Now, this is actually the only one that I've got that is boxed. So I'll just pick the box up here. This is what the boxes look like for the range. All the ships came in the same type box. And as I've said many times before, in regards to sort of talking about Matchbox boxes and things like that, fantastic artwork. You've got a sort of really good depiction of a captain, or and then it just sort of details the sort of features. So it mentions about this model is fitted with wheels. You've got a nice picture of a battleship there, and then sort of really good depiction of the sea, and obviously the boat would sit there, and they've even done like a ship rather. They've even done sort of the wake sort of around where it sits in the box. And it just obviously shows the other models in the range. Then on the back, again, sort of really nice artwork showing some of the other models in the range, and again, sort of just highlighting the features. Waterline, super fast wheels. But yeah, so they were all done in that style of box. Even the box ones, they're not terribly expensive. This one, I think I was lucky with it, to be fair. Cost me less than a tenner off eBay a few years ago, admittedly. But yeah, it'd be nice to get them all in boxes, obviously. But I'm quite happy with the range, with the sort of collection as it is. As I say, apart from the submarine. So yeah, so that's the anti-aircraft cruiser. Now, as I say, the range lasted until 1980. Now, I've got in my Matchbox book here, they clearly did plan to introduce a couple of others. You see, you've got a tanker there and a container ship, but obviously they're sort of prototypes or sort of unpainted. But yeah, never released by Matchbox, which is a shame. I think they would have gone quite nicely with the range, and it's obviously that they were looking at trying to sort of branch out into civilian ships. But as I say, I don't think it was a terribly successful range. And reasons for that, first of all, similar with the dinky boats, first of all, they don't float. And I think you kind of would want a toy ship or boat to float. you know, the fact they go along the carpet's not sort of terrible, but I think that's one thing that's possibly against them. The other thing, of course, and this is probably one of the best examples, is the unrealistic colour schemes. Maybe these appeal to kids, I don't know, but of course, in the terms of actual representation of a real sort of warship, it's totally unrealistic. So I think that's another thing. Also, the fact that the majority of the range aren't real ships, so it's not like you can collect like a model of a ship that you might even have seen in real life or anything like that. You know, the vast majority of the range are completely made up. So I think that's another thing that's kind of slightly against them. The other thing is, you know, and this is something that's, you know, the Dinky range did sort of excel at, was the fact that they had really good working features. Now, as I mentioned with these, okay, the gun turrets turn, but that's it. These are simply too small to have any kind of a working feature. So yeah, they don't really do much. So I think that's another thing that's kind of counts against them. Also, the range is a bit of an odd mix. You've got things like this that, although it's a made-up ship, it's clearly meant to be a current ship of the period of sort of like late 70s into the early 80s. But then you get a battleship, which can only be World War II. The corvette and the convoy escort, again, for me, they're World War II ships. And as I mentioned, the submarine, with it having deck guns, again, clearly meant to be a World War II ship. And yet the rest of the ships are, as I say, what you'd probably class as sort of, you know, current service ships. So it's a bit of an odd mix in that regard. And the final thing is that the whole range, as I say, they all came in this same size box. And Matchbox would just make them as large as it possibly could to fit in that box, which means that they kind of suffer in terms of scale. So you've got the aircraft carrier, which would be in real life the largest of the ships, and then you get the corvette, which would be the smallest. And although it's ever so slightly short, you know, it's virtually the same size, and it's just, I mean, in real life, this would be about a third the size of the aircraft carrier. And then, you know, again, you can compare it with another large ship would be the battleship. You know, it just looks completely unrealistic. As I say, in terms of if you're trying to put them all together, they're completely out of scale. But you know, as I say, it's not the first time Matchbox would do sort of fit the box type things. So yeah, so as I say, that's why there's a few things. Now, having said all that, I like the range. I think they're really nice. I think they are appealing, despite the unrealistic colours. You know, they are quite an appealing range. And as I say, with the exception of the submarine, it's a pretty easy range to collect. Now, as I say, despite it being what I think an unsuccessful range, or relatively unsuccessful range for Matchbox, as I mentioned at the start of the video, they did do a playmat. I'm guessing, of course, a playmat is something that's fairly easy to produce, though, and it's something that they did for other ranges. Playmats aren't something I'm normally that bothered about. I always find them a bit weird when they've got representations of things that should be three-dimensional, like buildings and things like that, but obviously they're completely flat. But I have to say, and again, this goes back to, you know, Matchbox artwork, it looks fabulous. The colours are great on it. The seas are really lovely blue. You've got loads of detail on it. You've got a helipad over there. You've got sort of warehouses, cranes, all that kind of stuff. So I think visually, I think it looks really nice. The other reason is I picked one of these up because I found it on eBay. I found a lot of two of these on eBay, and I got it for about £8.50 for both of them. And even better than that, they were both boxed. So that's the box for the playmat. So it's got the same sort of captain as featured on the normal boxes. You can see that. So yeah, I thought for £8.50, and to be fair, you know, it does kind of complete the collection. It's great, you know, to have the playmat as well. But yeah, as well as the playmat, by the way, was introduced in 1978, so again, was available for the last 2 years of the range. And alongside that, there was also a Seakings Harbour playset. I'm just going to pause the video there, and I'll just bring this out, so be back in a second. There we go. So that is the Seakings Harbour playset. Now, I'm just going to have a quick look at it here. Just take the top. So again, you got sort of a playmat with this one, although this one tends to just represent the sea. Instructions and various sort of parts to make up your own harbour. So There you go. That's kind of an idea of what you can get. So there's over 50 pieces in this. You also got the frigate included as part of the included with the. There wasn't an exclusive model that came with the playset, and you also got one of these little SRN6 hovercraft, same as from the Superfast range. Now, because it's quite a big playset, it kind of justifies doing its own video, I think. So, but I just thought, obviously, I've got to include it as part of this one. Again, you've got sort of great artwork on the front. Shows the frigate, as I say, that comes with the range, and the hovercraft there in the background. A few details there, so you can see you get it's 50 multi-position harbour pieces, diecast frigate and hovercraft, and 14 harbour and coastal craft. And those are just kind of little plastic ships that you get, ships and boats and things like that you get just to kind of add to the scene. But it's a really, really nicely thought out playset. Let's put that to one side. So as I say, it's quite a surprise that even though I don't think it was a terribly successful range, they've actually really gone to town on the playset. There were other ranges that didn't get a playset anywhere near as good as that. There was a couple of others. There was like the Beachhead Assault one that went with the sort of small size military range, things like that. There was a container port playset that had like a train with it, things like that. But yeah, I think that playset is definitely one of the best. So that one, as I say, was also introduced in 1978 and lasted until 1980. And so yeah, after 1980, the range kind of disappeared from the catalogues. And in terms of Matchbox, that was the end of Seakings, but it wasn't the end of the castings. Sometime in, I'm guessing, the early 2000s. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find an exact date. A Chinese company, which seems to go by the name of Rich Rainbow, obtained somehow the moulds for both the Seakings range and also the Matchbox Battle Kings range of sort of tanks and military vehicles. And they actually reproduced them in their own colour schemes and with some slight modifications. And yeah, that included the whole of the Seakings range. Now, as I say, there were 8 different castings. So Rich Rainbow didn't bother kind of reproducing the same casting under a different name. So there's only 8 models in the Rich Rainbow range. I haven't got all of them, but I have got 3 of them. So the first one is the aircraft carrier. So as you can see straight away, it's in a much more realistic colour scheme. They've actually gone to the little bits of detail on the tails of the planes. A different number, again, it's a totally spurious number. 68 is actually USS Nimitz's number, and that's clearly not USS Nimitz. But yeah, I think there is a couple of slight differences. I'll just grab the Seakings one. So there you go, you can sort of compare the two. So they're virtually the same. There's I'd say a couple of slight little differences. But in terms of construction, it's all the same. Going back to the aircraft carrier, I should mention actually that this is the one that had actually a metal deck. So it's one of the, as well as it being kind of one of the largest models anyway, it's also probably the heaviest model in the range, as all the others had plastic decks. But yeah, I'm pleased to say that with this one, we've got the same kind of construction. But yeah, really nicely detailed. Obviously, just says made in China underneath. Kind of no other detail than that. Really good deck markings on it. I think they've sort of made a really good effort on that. So yes, that's the. Well, these were released, I should say, under the name of Battle Cruisers, spelt with a Z. They all came in exactly the same box. There you go. It says Rich Rainbow. But yeah, there's no date on the box at all to kind of say, where when they were kind of released. But I'm pretty sure it's kind of early 2000s. And there's the rest of the range. So you can see all of the ones, all 8 different castings are there, obviously in much more realistic colour schemes. Now the other 2 that I've got are the helicopter carrier, and again, it's identical, except that they've changed on the Matchbox one. Let me just grab it. It's gone. There it is. On the Matchbox one, it's clearly meant to be a missile launcher. On here, they've just duplicated the gun turret. And then what they've done is the missile launcher they've actually put at the stern, whereas on the Matchbox one, it's the gun turret. So they just swapped a couple of the turrets round slightly. They nicely sort of painted up the helicopter rotor blades, and as I say, the actual markings of the ship are nicely done. I suppose white gun turrets aren't terribly realistic, but it's it's not bad. Again, obviously 125 as I say, this is based on Jeanne d'Arc, so yeah, the numbers totally wrong. But yeah, much more kind of realistic colour scheme. So that's the Rich Rainbow Battle Cruisers helicopter carrier. And then the last one that I've got is the submarine. Now, the obvious difference here is it's got no deck guns. Now, I'm guessing this was an attempt to make it into more of a modern submarine. As I say, it was something that, although it does still have a gun moulded into the top of the superstructure, yeah, as I say, modern submarines, well, really ever since the end of the Second World War, submarines haven't had deck guns. So I think it was probably just a simple way of trying to make this look more modern, obviously giving it a more realistic colour scheme again. But yeah, they're not expensive. I think each of these has cost me less than £5 each. They're all boxed, the 3 battlecruiser ones that I've got. I don't think they were terribly widely available. They do crop up from time to time, but it's worth sort of checking out on eBay, things like that. And they do make a sort of nice addition to the Seakings collection. As I say, I would like to add the other 5 at some point if I can. But yeah, so that's Matchbox Seakings. I will, as I say, at some point do a separate video on the playset. I'm kind of working out how best to do that. As I say, it's quite a big playset, but it's definitely worth doing a video on. And also I'll incorporate the models as part of that. But yeah, as I say, don't think it was a totally successful range. But having said all that, and despite the sort of various reasons for why I don't think it was successful, I like the range myself. It appeals. And I think it's a fairly easy one to collect. So that's Matchbox Seakings. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do for my next video. Might look at doing some more sort of fire engine ones or something like that. But yeah, please do like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you all very soon. Bye.